an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering what we do in the shadows. Episode, what is this? 7? Episode 8, Citizenship. In this episode, I am so excited because we are back with Jenna, and she transitions to full vampire, and she is just as uncomfortable about it, and yet sort of into it as I feel like I would also be, and I am delighted by her. Welcome, Jenna. And you, welcome to you to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashley for commissioning this episode. So Kyle is in the chat. Hi, Kyle. This episode was just what I had been wanting. You guys know that I keep bringing up Vicky, Jenna, in the show, and I will begin calling her by her name in the show because I just finally have begun to remember it. But, she was just a puzzle to me, you know, her on the outskirts of everything. We would pan back to her here and there, and she wasn't fully transitioned yet. She didn't seem to understand what was going on. And I wondered how she was going to cope with having to kill people. And I also wondered about, you know, is there a way to feed without killing people? Which is exactly what she asks. And Nadja has no patience for it. I was going to say no interest. That's even too, like, that no interest makes it sound like she considered it at all. No patience it's just more like the very fact that Jenna is so queasy about the whole thing is tiresome to her. And she just doesn't want to even, like, go down the road of trying to entertain being able to be a vampire without killing. Like, why? What? No, that's not what this is about, babe. No, there's no way to do that. And I think there probably is, but, like, yeah, no. Okay. We start things off here with Nadja watching her through the window as Jenna looks in the mirror at herself, and she's partially in, like, she's translucent in this reflection. You can see the rest of the room through her a little bit. And when she turns to the camera at one point to say, like, did you see that? Behind her, she's, like, smiling at the camera and winking. Like, her reflection is doing a whole separate thing. I just really enjoy this a lot. It's really trippy and weird. This isn't something that, you know, I feel like is in any lore about what it's like to become a vampire. This feels like the show just doing kind of wild shit for fun, and I am 100% here for it. Although you can correct me, guys, if this is part of lore, like gradually, slowly becoming less visible, I would love to know about that. But I love... She's just like, she says, I've been going through some changes. And we see her, first of all, in the, like, park at night, hissing at people. She's floating in her sleep, and her roommate is trying to, like, get a photo or take film of it, but can't do it before she falls back down towards the bed. She's, like, climbing up trees and eating squirrels in the middle of the night. And even reacts at one point to a painting of the crucifixion because there's it's a crucifix. And when she backs away from it, her hand is in the sun and winds up lighting on fire. And she just sprints out of the classroom holding her jacket over her head with a trail of smoke behind her. Yet another thing that I really like. The idea that it's not like sunlight kills her the way that it does a vampire, but she has a sensitivity to it, as she puts it, which I find to be a little bit more interesting to bring up Dresden Files, because the Dresden Files is one of the few works that I've seen where there are people who are sort of in between vampires. Like, they have been bitten and have drank blood. Or not drank blood, but they have been bitten. In Dresden Files, it's not like you have to drink a vampire's blood to be transformed. In that, they are venomous. So, I believe, right? And if they bite you and drain you to the point of death, that starts the thing. And you have to kill somebody in order to fully transition. But in the meantime, you're a half vampire, which essentially boils down to you do have a bloodlust. You want to suck blood, but you can still eat regular food, and you are super strong, super fast. You get like a lot of the perks, but you also can still be around during the day. You can be in the sun. And for me, it just felt like you get, like, other than the bloodlust, it felt like all perks. It felt like the sort of thing that a lot of people would just be happy to have. Like, yeah, struggling against your own desire for human blood all the time would be very, very tough, and not all of us would be able to manage it. I don't personally hold a lot of hope that I would do super well with that. I'm not good at resisting temptation, guys. But I just felt like it was just such a bunch of superpowers that I had a hard time seeing it as like an inherently negative thing. And, you know, they can still even have kids and everything. Like, you're able to do everything that a human being can and more. You get the best of both. So it felt kind of like, well, that sounds rad then. And I really appreciate that Jenna's situation, that her being in the middle of this and not having chosen a side yet, I guess there's not even choosing a side. She can either stay halfway or go all the way, but it's not like she can choose to go back to being human. I like that there are huge downsides to trying to straddle the line, and that it's not comfortable for her. She doesn't feel well. She doesn't look good. She isn't happy. And I appreciated that, because otherwise it just seemed like, well, then people choosing to become a full vampire to me didn't make a lot of sense, because there's so many drawbacks to being a full vampire that you wouldn't experience if you were only half, that I would prefer to be half and never fully transition. But here, it's just like you're waiting for her to actually do it. And I love Nadja watching her and being like, oh, this is so awkward. But also, I'm sure that I was this way at her age. And nobody like told me or helped me through it. And she uses language that's often used to describe like going through puberty for girls and like experiencing your period and all this stuff. And I mean, that age, like right around 10, 11 years old, I got my period when I was 9, which is just not really fair at all. But the average girl, I think, gets their period at like 14. And when you like are around that age, it's a super awkward, ugly, like kind of weirdo age. A lot of young girls start to get really into sort of like occult stuff around that age. It's a sort of running joke if you've seen those memes. And I think it's partially due to like, you're beginning to realize that you're transitioning into another part of your life. And there's a sense of like, okay, what's next? And trying to like grasp what being an adult is. And you just think of it as like more serious and darker. And so you begin to look at stuff that seems more serious and darker, but is still like fantastical in a way that's comforting to you in a childish sort of way. And so that's part of why I think that can be like the stopover. Anyway, I just really liked the way they decided to have Nadja commentating on how she's doing, because it felt very familiar. As a girl, I have watched people go through the like weird, awkward stages in their lives and been like, oh God, I remember this, you know. It's hard, you know, you want to save other young girls from going through the bullshit that you went through and experiencing some of the pain and mistakes, but there's nothing that you can say that they'll hear because they don't believe that you understand, because they really think their own situation is like unique and different, because we all think that, even though it's just like mostly not true. Anyway, so I'm going to back away from that real quick and start with the house meeting where Nandor is saying, everybody, if you're going to lure a victim into the house and then you let them live, show them out. You know, it's a common courtesy. I love this. All I can imagine is that there's like some like half dead bitten person wandering the halls of this house, not sure where the front door is. Like, I really want to imagine what this to me sounds like the kind of thing that they would say about leftovers. Like, they've had this house meeting before, but it's a slightly different handling of it. If it's possible, when you leave the house, blow out the candles. As somebody who recently had a fire in her office, in the 5 minutes between when she left her office and peed and came back, I cannot emphasize enough to you guys how much more careful I'm going to be being about leaving candles alone. It sucks because I wasn't trying to leave a candle alone. I was just trying to go pee and come back, and blowing a candle out just to go pee just really feels excessive. And it was a freak accident. It being alone wasn't exactly the problem, but it caused enough damage and was scary enough. Guys, I'm not trying to like preach here or anything, but seriously, it was such a short amount of time. And when I came in, my entire lamp was burning like a torch. My whole wall was scarred and blackened. The ceiling was blackened, and my house was full of smoke. I couldn't believe how much smoke this very small fire produced. It reeked of burnt plastic in here for like a full day and a half. And we had to just completely repaint everything. All of the stuff in my office was covered in like a fine sheet of soot after the smoke like landed. So I had to clean every object off individually and take down my curtains and wash those. Like, it was such a ball breaker. Outside of how bad the fire could have been if I hadn't come back into the room when I did, outside of that, it was such a just sheer pain in the ass. I am not kidding, y'all. Don't leave your candles alone. If you have cats, just... you know what dicks they can be. What happened with me, you can see the little edge of it on my lamp back here if you're in the crowdcast. I had a scarf that used to belong to my abuela hanging over my lamp. And when I ran out the door to pee, I slammed the office door, which caused a whoosh of air, and the whole scarf fluttered up and landed on the candle. Could never have predicted that that would happen. I didn't realize that the scarf could reach the candle from where it was, but it was just an instant, and that changed my whole week. I was supposed to be on like this lovely vacation for my birthday, and I spent over half of it just cleaning and repairing my office, and it sucked. So, I know that this is meant to be a joke from Nandor, but I am here to tell you, it only takes one mistake. I'm 37, and I have never had a close call like that with a candle. And who knows how it could have gone if I had, let's say, peed and then went out to the car and went out to get something to eat. I mean, can you imagine what would have happened if I didn't just come right back into this room? It's not cute. So just keep it in mind. It's not something to play with. Anyway. And I do appreciate Nandor, like, turning and blowing out a candle that's like half a room away. So at this point, Laszlo asks what the smell is. And Colin says he's wearing a new cologne that he found in the bathroom at the office called Mr. Hijinks. I like to think that this was like ad-libbed, that they didn't have a name for the cologne and he just came up with one in the scene. I don't know, like maybe they wrote it, but there is something about that name that is it's so perfect because it's just absolutely not Colin Robinson's vibe at all. Mr. Hijinks, like I was fucking cackling, you guys. And Laszlo is like, why would you wear that? And he says, to annoy you, to which Laszlo immediately replies, touché. Throughout all of this, Nandor is demanding their attention because they are talking over him and interrupting him. And he is disgusted at the fact that they are not paying attention to him or stopping. And he says, when I led a country, I would kill people for interrupting me the way that you guys did. And Colin is like, you ran a country? And he says, yes, I was the leader of Al Kolanudar. And when he says it, Laszlo says, it sounds like you just made that up. But he looks it up, and apparently he hasn't checked in on the country in a minute. So Colin Robinson looks it up, and apparently the country itself was dissolved in 1400. And somehow Nandor just like didn't keep track of this or check or anything. And he's horrified because that was his home. And he doesn't feel like he belongs anywhere now. And this leads to the ongoing thing of this episode, which is him trying to become a U.S. citizen. But he attempts to, mesmerize the worker who is giving him his test. Now, the way that he presents it is that government workers seem to be soulless, and the attempt to, infiltrate their mind isn't working because they just are so like without substance that there's nothing for it to hold on to. However, we have seen that Nandor isn't good at mesmerizing at all. It's unclear whether he used to have this ability and lost it, or if he just never really had it, but he's clearly still in denial of how not good at it he is. And I have to think that this is not, I think if Laszlo was there, he could have managed this guy. I think it's Nandor. I don't think it's anything to do with the government worker. I think Nandor is just not very good at this. And he says, now what do I have? Nowhere is my home. And eventually there's a really great scene with Guillermo that I loved so much. So, God, this moment when Nadja is watching Jenna chase animals around in the park and suck their blood, it's like a very sickly donkey that you want to smash in its skull because it is just too pitiful to look at. Oh, I love this so much. It's so fun. Nobody had to talk with me about my unholy transition. I had no one to guide me. I love her hissing at the people who are walking their dog. Oh, God. So there's this moment, guys, that I really loved. I thought it would turn into more of a thing than it does, and I'm not mad. But Nandor comes up behind this guy, and he's floating in the air behind him, and just like scares the dude, who turns around and says, "Oh my God." And Nandor just lands and says, "Forget it. You're released. I'm not hungry." It's just, and he interrupts this guy who's trying to run away. I just found out that my country doesn't exist anymore, and I'm really depressed about it, and I've lost my appetite. You don't want to hear about all this. You were running away, and the guy stops and is like, "Well, are you okay? It's kind of you to ask, but really, you go. Flee. Flee." I thought for sure that this was going to become a thing where he like befriended somebody random that he had been about to eat. And I almost like went down the path of, is he going to transform this dude into a vampire? And Guillermo's going to be super fucking salty about that. But it turns out we don't need that. We have Jenna already in place. And I think I had mentioned back when Jenna got bitten, I was like, I have to wonder what Guillermo is going to make of this, because I think he's going to be pretty fucking pissed. And indeed, my friends, indeed he is. But he hasn't been like, there's not time for him to really openly simmer about it. It's all internal, a little bit shared with the camera, but you know, otherwise he keeps it to himself throughout. I think that maybe next episode we'll get to see more of it. So yeah, Guillermo, at this point, he has chased after Nandor to try and be like, what's going on? And he sees him let this guy go and is like, are you okay? And Nandor says how he feels like he doesn't belong anywhere. And Guillermo's like, well, maybe you could become a citizen of this country. That would make you feel better. And Nandor's just like, all right, cool, good idea. I'll see you back at home. And just points out a bus stop and turns into a bat and takes off and just leaves Guillermo there. This turning into a bat thing, I could really see how fucking old it would get. Man, you guys know, like, I've said it so many times that if I were going to have a superpower, if I could pick one, it would be teleportation, because I hate the act of traveling places. You know, it's like getting on a plane. It's the whole thing. You've got to drive down to the fucking airport. You've got to pay for parking, or you have to pay for a ride there. You have to bring your stuff and go through security, wait to board, get on there, and then wait like before the thing takes off. It's a huge cramp. Imagine if you could just like open a little portal and step through and you're in the lobby of the hotel. Done. Oh my God. Now, granted, being a bat, you couldn't like go to Florida super easily. It's not as good as teleportation. But all things considered, it's better than the bus. I have to assume. Unless you're Jenna and you turn into that bizarre, like, gremlin sort of gargoyle-ish thing that she turns into, which I can't tell you guys how much I enjoy the fact that she doesn't turn into a regular bat. I like that just feels like such a real thing that, you know, I would be so excited to turn into a bat and then I'd attempt it and it would just be like, what is that? I just could see that happening. I found that to be very funny. But anyway, so we go to Nadja, who has finally decided to sit down with Jenna and talk to her about what's going on. And she says, I bit you. I made you drink my blood. What did you think I was doing? And Jenna is just like, I didn't think vampires existed. And Nadja starts cracking up and is like, oh, sarcasm. Okay. She doesn't get it at all. So Jenna's like, well, do I feel like crap for eternity? And Nadja says you feel like crap because you're eating crap. You're living like a chimney boy. I want to keep that in mind. I'm going to tell myself that when I start to like eat junk. Natasha, why are you eating like a chimney boy? You deserve better than that, babe. What are you doing? I don't know. That fucking killed me. If you want to be a powerful, strong vampire, you have to complete your transition. You just have to drink some human blood, baby. That's all. I'm going to teach you how to kill. And this is when she says, is there any way I could drink their blood but not kill them? And Nadja just says, shh. You just shut up now, my stupid little baby. Oh my God. I loved that so much. She keeps on calling her that too. And Jenna doesn't even seem offended. Like, it's not until Laszlo shows up and says she should be put in a cage that she starts to be like, wait, what the fuck? But here she is still, you know, she's fine with it. So Guillermo has called immigration, and it turns out that Nandor started the process to immigrate in 1992, but never finished it. And then we get this really wild bit. I'm going to read this. Nandor is saying, I did apply for my American citizenship back in 1992 for 5 reasons, and 5 reasons only. Johnson, Jordan, Bird, Barkley, Ewing. The starting lineup for the 1992 U.S. Olympic men's basketball team. The dream team. And then we see he's got all of this memorabilia in a room that he calls the dunk zone. He says they were merciless, titans among men, conquerors of the court. I simply had to pledge my undying allegiance to their nation. I love this whole idea. It makes total sense with him, like, because sports are, you know, a sort of stand-in for combat in a lot of ways. And Guillermo, when he asks him, well, why didn't you finish? He says, probably because the Macarena swept the nation, so I didn't really have time for anything else. And he says this, and Guillermo just looks at him, puzzled, looks at the camera, and then it cuts to another scene. And I can't tell you how much I loved that joke. It's nothing. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It's like, it's barely, but it was so funny to me. The idea of Nandor being distracted from this, like, apparent obsession with this basketball team by the Macarena. And what does that mean to him? What was he doing? I have a lot of questions I want to know. So then we go back to Nadja and Jenna, and she's like, we have to figure out what your special power is. And she's like, maybe it's seduction. Try seducing me. I am just a stupid human man. Ouch, ouch, my balls. I'd love to drink beer. She tells her, bite your lip seductively. And she tries to bite her lip and just literally bites through it. Have you guys ever tried to give advice to somebody about how to, like, be sexy who didn't inherently understand it? Because, like, for me, when I was younger, seduction was my thing. It was a sport. I just, like, straight up, it was just, like, a thing I did for fun. And I had a really close friend who, like, she didn't view sex as a sport the way that I did, where I was just like, no, I just want to, like, sleep with every dude and see how they are, just out of curiosity. And if they're good, I'll go back. If they're not, bye. But at least I know. Like, I had no compunction about body count or anything like that. I was just like, no, I just would like to sleep with him just to know what he's like. And it would be very revealing, let me tell you. You would find out some things. But I had a friend who was much more conservative than me. And at first, we were young enough that she just was, like, waiting. And then when she finally got to an age where she was beginning to feel like she might be ready to have sex, she would talk to me about like ways to like dress, act, to give the signal, you know? And I would try and like coach her, and it was so weird. And I had to keep in mind, the thing about some people is that they don't act seductive. And sometimes that's what's attractive to a person, is that they aren't using charms and charisma. They're being themselves. And if you are somebody like her who was interested in sleeping with a person that they were in a relationship with, that would be enough. You don't need to bring in a bunch of like coquettish eyelash flapping, you know, like it's not necessary when somebody actually is into you in that way. It's just, at the time, she didn't really want to hear that. Cause even then I knew that. I was like, the thing that he likes about you, this guy that you're into, is that you're not like me, where I'm clearly a player, and dudes who aren't into that can tell, and they don't want to screw with me, which I was not offended by. I wasn't for everybody, and that was fine. But I was like, that's what he likes about you, is that you don't do the kind of things that I do. And she just kind of didn't seem to really buy it, and insisted that I like show her. And I tried, but it was awful. It was just so embarrassing and unnatural. And it really felt like she was just trying too hard, and she felt weird and embarrassed by it. And if you don't feel it, if you're not believing it as you do it, it doesn't come across. It's just like you reciting lines and being a weirdo, and it's not sexy. It's just kind of like, what are you doing? What is that? And eventually I was just like, can you just be yourself? He's going to wonder what the fuck you're doing. And I think eventually she realized, because she could see how it didn't feel right to her, and she just didn't want to do it. But this whole scene just kept reminding me of that, because I was very vampy for a minute there in my life, you know? And sometimes I think back and I'm just like, I really went hard. But that was like, you know, that was the thing that I like enjoyed. And that's not for everybody. So what it turns out Jenna's whole thing is, we find out, is invisibility, which comes across in this scene where nobody is like noticing her. And that starts all out here, because when they're trying to figure out her special power, Nadja tells her, my power is crawling. Let me show you. And she like is able to go up the wall, and she's just hanging out up by the ceiling. So we have Jenna attempt to like imitate her, and she gets some of the ways up, falls down and breaks a bunch of stuff. And Laszlo comes in and walks right past her. And this was the first moment where I was kind of like, why did he not see her when he came in? Like, I wasn't getting what they were doing. He walks right past her and looks up at Nadja on the ceiling. He sees her before he sees Jenna on the floor. And it's like, when she says, I'm teaching Jenna, you know, how to be a vampire, he says, who? And she has to specifically point Jenna out before he notices her. And this is when he says she should be in a bloody cage. And Nadja's like, what the hell is the matter with you? How could you say that to her? So yeah, later on at this party, again, she tries to like say something about Jenna, and the guy she's talking to says, who? And Jenna loses it. And it's just like, this is pointless. Nobody even sees me. What the fuck? And I really kind of like, I felt bad, because as a woman who is like, looks like Jenna now at this point in my life, we are very invisible. When you are above a certain weight and above a certain age, you just sort of vanish. And Jenna is like obviously not actually meant to be my age in the show. She's meant to be like, you know, a college student. So I'm putting her probably supposed to be like 22, maybe. Maybe supposed to be younger, but I've seen her in things before. I think that she's probably like a little closer to my age. And part of me was like, man, this hits a little bit close to home. It's just being like essentially invisible unless I really put a lot of work into my outfit and my makeup and everything. I'm just like not really a factor the way that I was at one time. I was used to walking into a place and every eye turning. That's part of like just youth, you know, as much as anything. And the feeling of like just being invisible is something that is like a recent development for me, and I hate it. You guys know I like attention. What do I do for a living? I'm here on fucking camera by myself talking for an hour. Like, this is my bread and butter. So yeah, I don't like being invisible. Doesn't agree with me. But also, you can't stop aging. And there's just a point at which you have to work harder. And I'm not exactly interested in putting in the work. That's what it comes down to. But so, like, I felt a little bit bad that her superpower winds up being a thing that otherwise kind of causes her pain. And I was sort of worried that her figuring out her superpower was invisibility was going to turn out to be a bummer to her, that she was going to be really sad. But instead, she seems very excited by it. And I was relieved because personally, I think invisibility as a power blows. I would never want that power. I mean, like I said, I want people to notice me. That's like my entire thing. That is the opposite of what I would want. The only time that could be helpful would be if you're trying to rob a bank. And even then, if they've got any sort of like body heat scanning, unless you're a vampire, I guess, but they'll still be able to like take you down. It's not like you become immaterial. Being invisible only takes you so far. So yeah, for me, I would like hate that power. Now, granted, she's trying to hunt people. So I guess it's a really good power if you're trying to hunt people. But yeah, it takes a little while, and it takes like essentially a tantrum for her to actually disappear. But I did love the scene because Nadja is so excited on her behalf. And the way that she just vanishes, I thought that the effect was really cool looking. And the way that this boy like runs into her, he's got long hair and a drink in his hand. And Nadja comes up to him, "You've just spilled your tankard of mead all over my companion." And he says, "Who?" And this is when Jenna has to raise her hand and be like, "Me, right here." So she starts shoving people out of her way as she is invisible, and she picks up a keg and just bashes it on the floor, which was pretty dope, honestly. And Nadja is like, "Dude, did you not just see that? You went invisible. This is super rad. That is a really awesome power. You are going to murder so many human people with this." I love Nadja's face. She is so sincerely excited for her. Genuinely like, "Oh my God, can you believe it?" And when Jenna makes herself disappear, there's this weird sort of, I don't even want to call it smoke. It looks more like soot or like dust that comes up off her skin. And then she vanishes and she can go in and out of it. It's really, really fun to watch. And as she does this, the camera pans over to some girl who is apparently watching her and thinking that maybe somebody put something in her drink, because she's just like, what the fuck? She just watched this girl vanish and reappear. I love this so much. She's having such a good time. So she goes to the dude who ran into her with his drink. And Nadja is like, does he look a little bit more delicious now after all of that? And she walks up to him while he's on stage, invisible, and yanks him off the stage and pulls him down the steps and into the bushes. I was waiting for somebody to follow him, but it does not seem like anybody gave a shit. I don't know, like, I'm really curious what would happen in this instance if this actually were real life. If people would definitely follow him, I think. I mean, if it feels like he's being yanked, I feel like people would try and see if something was grabbing onto him, even though it doesn't make like actual sense that something could be invisible. I think a lot of us just would check, right? So I don't feel like this would necessarily work out this way in life, is what I'm saying. However, I don't care. It's fine. I really enjoyed the scene. So he's sitting there, and all of a sudden, Jenna appears over him. And she says, "What the fuck?" And she says, hi there. No, it's okay. And then just bends down and bites him. And you see her eyes like fully transform. Like she goes bright yellow, her eyes. And I love Nadja off to the side, clasping her hands together and watching her. Like, she's like a parent watching their kid at a recital, like really nailing it, you know? And she goes up to him. She has this like jar and she says, "I just need a little bit." And she collects some of his blood in a jar and puts it in her bag so that she can have it later, which is I like that touch because that does seem like something she would do her personality strikes me as the type that plans ahead, that tries to be really practical. And the idea that she would collect some for later so that she doesn't have to kill again too soon, maybe because she doesn't like to kill, or maybe just because it's a pain, that just fucking really rang true to me. I really liked it. And just overall, this whole bit, I personally, I don't know, if you guys haven't seen Jennifer's Body, you may not get this, but I highly recommend Jennifer's Body. It's a really fun movie. It's Megan Fox, and she turns into, a vampire isn't really quite the right word, a ghoul. She's like possessed. And she eats boys, like exclusively. And every time that she eats, she gets super, super hot for a little while again. And then, like, as that energy begins to sort of fade, she grows, like, her hair gets, like, greasy and stringy, her skin pales, and she gets circles under her eyes, and she looks almost sick. And the whole thing is kind of about her going after shitty dudes who are either predators, like outright, or just incredibly dickish. And there's a part of you that's sort of cheering her on to eat all of these shitty teenage boys, and it's kind of fun. Kind of in the vein of like Teeth, if you've seen Teeth. But yeah, this kind of reminded me of that, and Nadja's like elation at her taking down these boys and really being specific about killing boys. Like, it just feels right. I really enjoyed it a lot. So while they were in the party, there was this kid that came up, and Nadja was trying to demonstrate. She was trying to demonstrate to Jenna about how to be seductive to boys because they're so easy. And this was something that I didn't really understand when I was doing my vampy thing. And I'm recognizing the pun at this point, and I didn't even mean it the first time, but there it is. I didn't realize, like, I didn't need to be putting nearly as much effort into it as I was, because I didn't get how easy it was. Because you don't need to seduce guys when you're young and hot. You just need to exist. And that's kind of all it takes. But I didn't really get that. And Nadja's here. She goes up to this guy. I'm very sorry for bumping into you. I'll punish myself later because I'm such a bad girl. Who are your parents? They're very bad for making such a big boy. And that's all she says. It's so awful. And he just says, I love you so much. And she turns to Jenna and says, see, it's very, very easy. I just might want to spend the rest of my life with you. I live to be your slave. So she tells him to go upstairs and put his head deep in the toilet bowl and flush it 7 times. And when he comes outside later and interrupts her, she tells him to go and eat some bricks. And he just wanders away, and we don't see anything from him again. I really, really, really want to know if he's still eating bricks, because she never told him to stop. Like, does this wear off? If we were in Dresden Files, sunlight would make it wear off. Like, once the sun rose, her effect on him would sort of wear away. But I don't get the opinion that's how this works with, like, the mesmerizing and this lore. So anyway, I just thought that was super funny. I really, really enjoyed it. And we go on further with the two of them having a sort of night out, and she asks Nadja, what about if we could like cozy up and watch the sun come up? And Nadja's like, okay, so the thing is you can't ever go in the sun again. I didn't mention that before, but yeah, they'll turn into a ball of flame. But later on, we see the two of them, and they're sitting, they put on a couple of, like, helmets, motorcycle helmets, and they go and sit on the roof. And there is this, like, moment where you're sort of thinking, okay, they're totally covered up, maybe this will work. But no. As soon as the sun comes up, they both begin to smoke and have to immediately turn into bats in order to get inside out of the sun. And I liked that, because if you could just wear something to protect yourself, that's too much of an easy out. You know, that is something that is in certain like books and lore, is that it's just that you can't be directly exposed to the sun. And I find that to be a little bit of a cheat. It depends on how it's done. It's not exclusively something that I think is a cheat, but I feel like it can be abused because the writer doesn't really know how to handle that, and they just needed to find a sort of like way around it. And it can feel like, well, what's the point of this restriction then? Because they can just do something so simple to get around it that it barely seems like a problem. And I really like that this isn't how it works. You know, they're fully clothed and covered from head to foot, and they're still smoking inside their clothes. It doesn't matter. That feels, I don't know, that's just more stakes for me. Also, actually, talking of turning into bats, earlier on, she asks when she you know, Laszlo's trying to show her how to become a bat. She asks, like, what about her clothes? And I think I may have asked this question myself at one point, but I delighted in the fact that her asking this question, it clearly had not occurred to either one of them to really ask. And Laszlo just basically is like, let's not overthink that part. And I was like, you know what? That's good advice. Like, as somebody personally who tends to overthink everything and always ask questions, I could stand with doing that a little bit less. So, point taken, Laszlo. I hear you, and I agree. But I did appreciate that being, like, referenced at all, you know? So, so let's back up a little bit and talk about Nandor again. So he has his, like, test with Guillermo. Well, not exactly a test. Guillermo just sort of asks him some preliminary questions. And where and when were you born? And he tells the truth about, like, you know, in 1262 and I won't try and pronounce the country again, that his country is in southern Iran. And Guillermo says, maybe don't mention Iran. Why did you leave your home country? Standard reasons, driven out by peasants. How many times have you been married? Just the once, to 37 women. I really enjoyed this a lot. I want to know what's up with Nandor's, like, sexual interest now, because we see him, clearly he has some, because a woman, like, hit on him at that club in the one episode where Colin kept interrupting and fucking things up for him. But we don't ever see him actually really getting into flirting or seeming to be interested in anybody in a more, like, drawn out way. And I'm curious what he's like when he's, like, into a woman, you know? I feel like he might be a little bit weird. So... So he goes to the immigration office, and there's this dude interviewing him. I love this so much. The dude, first of all, looks like he is wearing a wig. I think that has to be his real hair, though. We elect a president for how many years? And Nandor says 1,000 years with this, like, dramatic voice, and he clenches his fist. And the idea of self-government is in the first 3 words of the Constitution. So what are those words? Hey, you guys. What does the Constitution do for the people? It oppresses them. I could not stop laughing. At one point he says, like, talk about the right to bear arms. And he's like, well, in the summer, when it's nice out. And this is one of those jokes that's made a lot in, like, women's magazines and blogs, especially with Michelle Obama, because evidently, like, the first lady wearing sleeveless outfits was just never, it didn't happen. So when Michelle Obama started wearing sleeveless stuff, because she has great arms, the right to bear arms became like a thing in so many fashion magazines and whatnot. So it's not as fresh a joke for me, but I did enjoy it being included at all. So then we get to this point where he has to recite the oath of allegiance. And I hereby declare on oath that I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, and without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, so help me. And he can't say God, and eventually, when he does force himself to say God, a flame just leaps out of his mouth. I love it. It's like a full on, and he like screams, and it's clear that the flame burnt him. Like there's a trail of smoke as he leaves the room. I was very interested. Like the idea that that could happen. Again, vampire lore, it might say something like this in there, but I like to think that they invented that for the show, and I am 100% fine with it. I really thought this was fun. And also the fact that, like, when you stop and think about it, the fact that anything says, so help me God, it really doesn't make any sense. There are a lot of people who don't believe in God. A lot of people. Like, the fact that we still have that included in government documentation in order to require citizenship is wild and super outdated and just doesn't make any sense to me. It's like the Pledge of Allegiance and our one nation under God. Under God got like added later to the Pledge of Allegiance. It wasn't even part of the original, Anyway. So then we get a really good scene as he's leaving, and, he's with Guillermo, and obviously is just like, he didn't pass. And he says that he feels like a lost duck in the middle of the ocean. Guillermo just says, oh, will you stop fucking complaining? And he turns in shock. Excuse me? I'm tired of it. So what? You're not a fucking American citizen. You're not a citizen of anything. You're a vampire, okay? You can fly. You can transport anywhere. As a bat, you are immortal. Do you have any idea how much people would pay, who they would kill just to be who you are, to be in your shoes, in your fucking shoes? You should be fucking proud of yourself. Proud of who you are. And Nandor, he doesn't get what's going on here, really? Because that whole scene earlier, I kind of jumped over it, and we'll go back. But he's like, you know what? You're right. That's true. I am a cool and powerful vampire. And he jumps up on the nearest car. Hear my words. I am a proud vampire. And I will not bow down to your pathetic bureaucracies. It is you who will bow down to me. I love Guillermo watching him, and he has the same sort of proud expression on his face as Nadja had when she was watching Jenna. But yeah, this is very fun. I enjoyed this a lot. And I liked seeing Guillermo like be angry to Nandor's face, even though it's like in a sort of supportive way. I would like to see a moment where he really, he says, your tone was highly disrespectful, but you were right. And he says, thank you. And Nandor says, now that you have your confidence back, you probably need some vampire sidekick too. And he says, no, I'm good, and just walks away. So I'm going to bounce back a little bit to the moment where Guillermo sees Jenna for the first time. So she walks past. He sees her and says, is that the virgin girl? She waves and smiles and has her fangs. And he's like, wait, what? Is she a vampire now? To which Nandor's like, Dadoy. And you see him just standing in total puzzlement. And everything that Nandor says, he does not hear for the next few minutes. And then we go to him speaking directly to the camera. It's just like, Nadja transforms someone so random. It's crazy. It's like, it's crazy into a vampire. And then cuts to him screaming into a pillow, like a full-throated horror movie scream, which I have to say I really admire. Not a lot of actors let themselves really get into a scream. They do a like, ah, and that's not how you scream. I don't care if you're male or female. It's a lot more high pitched than that when you really scream. That kind of, that's an attempt at like an intimidation, but a scream of like true fear or frustration or whatever, when you really let go and let it rip, that's a lot more high pitched. Everybody, it is. So I really enjoyed watching him do that. But yeah, at one point, she like falls against the window outside because she doesn't transform into like a bat. She's more like I said, a sort of a goblin, really. And Guillermo hears her fall and says, sounded like someone threw a bag of garbage off the roof. And he goes and looks and sees her and says, yep, bag of garbage. Wow, so catty. And she asks, so is there any way that you could go to the door and let me back in? And he says, yeah. You can figure it out on your own since you're a fucking vampire now. And she yells through the window, I can hear you. Heightened senses. And you see him look really nervously at the camera, which I enjoyed that reminder that like he sees himself as her peer, but that's not really true anymore. If she's a vampire and he's not, he's a distinct disadvantage. And also like she's clearly a favorite of Nadja's at this point. So yeah, Guillermo, you may have to watch your step a little bit more around her than you had to in the past, buddy. Just saying. But yeah, so that's the episode. This was a super fun one. I really, really enjoyed this one. And I'm excited for the next one. Let's see, what's the next episode? Friday, October 22nd, called The Orgy. Oh boy. I'm excited for that. I have no idea how they'll pull that off on like a network show. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you again, Ashley, so much for commissioning this. I really appreciate it. And I hope that more people begin to commission this show because it seems like it's fallen a little bit behind. But yeah, fingers crossed because I would like to keep watching it. Thank you all again. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.